Uncover Poirot's Secrets, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot reveals thrilling mysteries. On the sun-drenched cliffs of Sandy Cove Manor, a scream shatters the serenity. Sir Reginald Cresswell lies dead, a bloodied telescope beside him. Who wielded it? Was it the elegant Lady Cresswell hiding a desperate secret? The ambitious heir, Peter Langley, driven by greed? Or the sharp-eyed novelist Miss Thornton, whose keen senses caught a whiff of jasmine and betrayal? Hercule Poirot, the master of the little gray cells, steps into a web of lies where every clue, cigarettes, crushed petals, a shadow on the cliffs, hides a truth. Will you unravel the killer's motive before Poirot reveals the shocking twist? Dive into Sandy Slaughter, Evil Under the Sun, a classic Agatha Christie mystery of love, vengeance, and deadly deception. Chapter 1. The Serenity of Sandy Cove Manor. The late August sun bathed the cliffs of Sandy Cove Manor in a golden glow, its rays shimmering across the azure expanse of the Devon coast. The estate, perched precariously above the sea, was a vision of grandeur, a sprawling Georgian pile with ivy-clad walls and windows that glinted like watchful eyes. Below, the private beach stretched in a crescent of fine, pale sand, lapped gently by waves that whispered secrets to the shore. To the casual observer, it was a scene of idyllic tranquility, a haven for the wealthy and privileged who sought respite from the clamor of London. But beneath this serene veneer, a subtle discord simmered, as though the very air held its breath. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, stood at the edge of the terrace, his straw hat tilted against the sun. He inhaled deeply, savoring the salt-tinged breeze. "A splendid spot, wouldn't you say?" he remarked to no one in particular, though his eyes flickered toward the small group gathered near the stone balustrade. The guests of Sandy Cove Manor, invited for a fortnight by its enigmatic owner, Sir Reginald Cresswell, were an eclectic assembly, their polite chatter masking the undercurrents of tension that Hastings, with his soldier's instinct, could not help but notice. Sir Reginald himself, a portly man in his late 50s with a ruddy complexion and a mustache that bristled with self-importance, was holding court. His voice boomed over the clink of teacups. "The finest view in all of Devon," he declared, gesturing expansively toward the sea. "My grandfather built this place to rival the great estates of Europe, and now, my friends, you shall enjoy its splendors." Beside him stood his wife, Lady Cresswell, a statuesque woman whose delicate features belied a sharpness in her green eyes. She smiled thinly, her gloved hand resting lightly on her husband's arm, though Hastings noted a certain stiffness in her posture. She was younger than Sir Reginald by some 20 years, and her elegance seemed almost too refined for the bluff geniality of her husband. Among the guests was Miss Clara Thornton, a novelist of some repute whose sharp wit and sharper tongue had already made her a figure of fascination and slight unease. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and she sipped her tea with an air of detached amusement, her eyes darting from one guest to another as though cataloging their flaws for her next book. Then there was Mr. Julian Drake, a financier from London whose sleek appearance and polished manners could not quite conceal a predatory glint in his eyes. He leaned casually against the balustrade, his conversation with Miss Thornton laced with a flirtatious edge that seemed to amuse her more than it charmed. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, A quiet, bespectacled woman in her 40s stood apart, her attention fixed on a small notebook in which she scribbled occasional observations. A botanist of some renown, she had been invited, it was said, to catalogue the rare flora of Sandy Cove's gardens, though her reserved demeanor suggested she was ill at ease in such company. Lastly, there was young Mr. Peter Langley, Sir Reginald's nephew and heir presumptive. A handsome, athletic man in his late 20s, he exuded an easy charm, though his laughter rang a touch too loud, his smiles a shade too forced. Hastings, ever observant, noted how Peter's eyes lingered on Lady Cresswell, who studiously avoided his gaze. The group was completed by Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Peter's widowed mother and Sir Reginald's sister-in-law. Her severe black dress and pinched expression marked her as a woman who carried her grief like a badge, though her sharp tongue suggested she was not one to be trifled with. As Hastings surveyed the scene, a figure approached from the manor's French doors. It was Miss Emily Pritchard, Sir Reginald's private secretary, a mousy woman with a nervous air and a clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. "Sir Reginald," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the arrangements for tonight's dinner are complete. Shall I confirm the menu with the chef?" "Yes, yes, do it, Emily," Sir Reginald replied with a dismissive wave, his attention already drifting back to his guests. Miss Pritchard hesitated, her lips parting as though to say more, then retreated with a nod. Hastings turned his gaze to the sea, his thoughts drifting to his friend Hercule Poirot. The little Belgian detective had promised to join him at Sandy Cove later that day, having been detained in London by some trifling matter of business. Hastings smiled to himself, imagining Poirot's fastidious disapproval of the salty air and sandy paths. Yet he knew that Poirot, with his unerring knack for sensing trouble, would find much to intrigue him in this gathering. There was something amiss here. Hastings could feel it, though he could not yet name it. The afternoon wore on, the guests dispersing to their rooms or the gardens, their polite exchanges giving way to quieter, more guarded conversations. Hastings wandered down to the beach where the tide was beginning to retreat, revealing shell and pebbles that gleamed in the sunlight. He bent to pick up a particularly smooth stone, turning it over in his hand, when a sharp cry pierced the air. He straightened, his heart quickening. The sound had come from the direction of the manor's boathouse, a small structure nestled at the edge of the cove. Hastings hurried toward it, his shoes sinking into the soft sand. As he rounded the corner, he saw Miss Thornton standing at the boathouse door, her face pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Captain Hastings," she gasped, her voice trembling. It's Sir Reginald. He's dead." Hastings pushed past her, his pulse racing. Inside the dim, damp interior of the boathouse, Sir Reginald Cresswell lay sprawled on the wooden floor, a crimson stain spreading across his white linen shirt. A heavy brass telescope, its base smeared with blood, lay beside him. The air was thick with the scent of salt and something far more sinister. Hastings knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse, though he knew it was futile. Sir Reginald's eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, his face frozen in a grimace of surprise. The wound on his temple was deep, the blood already congealing. This was no accident. Someone had struck him with deliberate force. Miss Thornton hovered in the doorway, her composure crumbling. "I came to fetch my shawl," she whispered. "I left it here this morning." And then I saw him. Hastings stood, his mind racing. "Did you see anyone else? Hear anything?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, nothing. It was so quiet. I thought everyone was still on the terrace." Hastings glanced around the boathouse. The telescope, a nautical relic from Sir Reginald's collection, was an odd choice for a weapon. Heavy, but not easily wielded. A small window overlooked the beach, its latch undone, suggesting someone could have entered or exited unnoticed. Footprints in the sand outside were already being erased by the encroaching tide. "We must fetch the others," Hastings said, his voice steady despite the shock. "And the police. No one must touch anything until they arrive." Miss Thornton nodded, her hands trembling as she clutched her shawl. As they hurried back to the manor, Hastings' thoughts turned to Poirot. If ever there was a case for the little Belgian's little gray cells, it was this one. The serenity of Sandy Cove Manor had been shattered, and beneath its polished surface, a web of secrets was about to unravel. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the beach, Hastings could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Somewhere among the guests, among the polite smiles and guarded glances, a murderer walked free. And only Hercule Poirot could bring them to justice. Chapter 2. The Crime. The boathouse at Sandy Cove Manor, with its weathered planks and salt-streaked windows, seemed to hold its breath as the news of Sir Reginald Cresswell's death rippled through the estate. The late afternoon light filtered through the open door, casting a grim pallor over the scene where Captain Arthur Hastings stood, his gaze fixed on the lifeless form of the manor's owner. The crimson stain on Sir Reginald's shirt had darkened, and the brass telescope, its base still slick with blood, lay accusingly beside him. Hastings, though no stranger to death from his days in the war, felt a chill settle in his bones. This was no battlefield casualty. This was murder, cold and calculated. Miss Clara Thornton, still trembling in the doorway, had regained a measure of her composure, though her eyes darted nervously toward the shadows of the boathouse. I must go tell the others," she stammered, clutching her shawl as though it could shield her from the horror before her. "Yes, but stay together," Hastings instructed, his voice firm. "No one must be alone until we know more, and send for the police at once." She nodded and hurried toward the manor, her footsteps muffled by the sand. Hastings remained, his soldier's instincts urging him to preserve the scene. He stepped carefully around the body, noting the details. The telescope, heavy and ornate, was not a weapon one would choose impulsively. The window, its latch undone, suggested a possible escape route, and the sand outside, though disturbed, bore no clear footprints thanks to the rising tide. The boathouse itself was sparse, a few ropes, a stack of oars, a single bench, but every detail felt significant, as though it might whisper its secrets to the right observer. Within minutes, the manor's guests began to gather at the boathouse, their faces a gallery of shock, fear, and suspicion. Lady Cresswell was the first to arrive, her green eyes wide with disbelief as she clutched the arm of young Peter Langley, who looked pale but resolute. "Reginald," she gasped, her voice breaking as she took a step toward the body, only to be gently restrained by Hastings. "Please, Lady Cresswell," he said softly. "We must not disturb anything until the police arrive." She nodded, her lips trembling, and turned her face away, though Hastings noted the way her hands twisted together, betraying a deeper agitation. Peter Langley, his jaw tight, stared at his uncle's body with an expression Hastings could not quite read. Grief, perhaps, or something more guarded. Mr. Julian Drake arrived next, his polished demeanor fraying at the edges. "Good God," he muttered, running a hand through his sleek hair. "Who could have done this?" His eyes flicked toward Lady Cresswell, then away, as though he regretted the glance. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, the botanist, approached more slowly, her notebook still clutched in her hand. She adjusted her spectacles and studied the scene with an almost clinical detachment, though her fingers tightened around the pencil she held. "A brutal blow," she remarked quietly, almost to herself. "The telescope, an odd choice." Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Peter's mother, was the last to arrive, her severe black dress making her look like a specter against the golden sand. "This is monstrous," she said, her voice low and venomous. "Reginald was a fool in many ways, but to be struck down like this—" She trailed off, her eyes narrowing as they swept over the group. Miss Emily Pritchard, the secretary, hovered at the edge of the gathering, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. I saw him only an hour ago," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was on the terrace, perfectly well." Hastings noted the time, 4:47 p.m., according to his pocket watch. "Miss Pritchard," he said, "can you recall exactly when you last saw Sir Reginald? And where everyone else was?" She blinked, flustered. "It was just after 3:30, I think. He was speaking with Mr. Drake about some investment. The others were on the terrace or in the gardens. I don't know precisely." Hastings nodded, filing the information away. He knew Poirot would demand precision, and already he felt the weight of his friend's absence. The police would come, but it was Poirot's methodical mind that would unravel this tangle. As if summoned by the thought, a familiar figure appeared at the crest of the path leading from the manor. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in a cream linen suit and a Panama hat, descended with his characteristic precise steps, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the sea breeze. His small, bright eyes took in the scene with a single sweeping glance, and Hastings felt a wave of relief. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I arrived to find tragedy." "What has occurred?" Hastings quickly recounted the discovery. Sir Reginald, dead from a blow to the head, the telescope as the likely weapon. The open window, the absence of clear footprints. Poirot listened intently, his hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly as though already arranging the facts in his mind. "Most interesting," Poirot murmured, stepping into the boathouse. He bent to examine the body, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. "The blow was struck with force, oui, but with precision. The telescope is heavy, yet it requires control to wield effectively. This was no act of impulse, Hastings." He straightened, his gaze sweeping over the gathered guests. "And who discovered the body, may I ask?" "Miss Thornton," Hastings replied, gesturing toward the novelist, who had returned and now stood with the others, her expression a mix of defiance and unease. Poirot's eyes twinkled as he regarded her. "Mademoiselle, you have a writer's eye for detail, no doubt. Tell me, what did you see when you entered?" Miss Thornton hesitated, then spoke with careful precision. I came to fetch my shawl as I told Captain Hastings. It was draped over the bench there. She pointed to a corner of the boathouse. I saw Sir Reginald lying on the floor, the telescope beside him. I didn't touch anything. I called for help at once. Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before shifting to the telescope. He crouched again, examining it without touching. A curious weapon, he mused, not one that one would pick up lightly. And yet it was here, ready to hand. Most convenient, none? The guests exchanged uneasy glances, and Hastings could sense the tension tightening like a noose. Poirot's presence, calm and commanding, seemed to sharpen their awareness of their own vulnerability. The distant wail of a siren announced the arrival of the local police, led by Inspector Harrow, a stout man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense air. He took charge with brisk efficiency, ordering his constables to secure the boathouse and begin taking statements. Poirot, however, remained apart, his eyes scanning the group as though reading a book only he could decipher. "Inspector," Poirot said, stepping forward with a polite bow. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I offer my assistance in this matter. The death of Sir Reginald is a puzzle, and I am, as you may know, a man who enjoys puzzles." Inspector Harrow raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I've heard of you, Mr. Poirot. Your reputation precedes you. We'll take all the help we can get." As the police began their work, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami," he said softly, "this is no ordinary crime. The choice of weapon, the timing, the setting, all speak of a mind that plans with care. We must observe, Hastings. The little gray cells, they are already at work." Hastings nodded, his mind racing with questions. Who among the guests had a motive strong enough to kill? Was it Lady Cresswell, whose marriage seemed strained? Peter Langley, the heir with a hungry look in his eyes? Or perhaps Miss Thornton, whose sharp wit hid a deeper cunning? The answers, he knew, lay in the details, and in Poirot's unmatched ability to see what others missed. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting the boathouse in shadow, Hastings felt a shiver of anticipation. The game, as Poirot would say, was afoot. Chapter 3. The Arrival. The twilight air hung heavy over Sandy Cove Manor as Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace, his small, neat figure silhouetted against the fading glow of the horizon. The sea whispered below, its rhythm unbroken by the tragedy that had unfolded in the boathouse. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was thick with unease. The guests' voices hushed as they gathered in the drawing room awaiting the police's instructions. Captain Hastings, standing beside Poirot, shifted uncomfortably, his soldier's instincts bristling at the undercurrent of suspicion that seemed to permeate the very walls. Poirot's arrival had been, as always, impeccably timed. He had stepped off the train from London only an hour before Miss Thornton's cry had shattered the peace of Sandy Cove, summoned by a vague but insistent letter from Sir Reginald himself. The letter which Poirot had shown Hastings on the journey was cryptic, hinting at a matter of some delicacy that required the detective's unique talents. Now, with Sir Reginald dead, that delicacy had taken a far darker turn. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and measured, "the letter from Sir Reginald, it troubles me. He wrote of unease, of a shadow over his household, and now he lies dead. This is no coincidence, Hastings." Hastings frowned, glancing toward the drawing-room's tall windows, where the guests' silhouettes moved like figures in a shadow play. Do you think he suspected someone was plotting against him? Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of intellectual curiosity. Perhaps, perhaps not. But Sir Reginald was a man of wealth and influence, and such men collect enemies as a magnet collects iron filings. We must discover what he feared, and who among this company had reason to silence him. They entered the drawing-room where Inspector Harrow was organizing his constables with brisk efficiency. The guests sat or stood in uneasy clusters, their faces a study in strained politeness. Lady Cresswell, seated on a velvet chaise, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Peter Langley stood by the fireplace, his hands thrust into his pockets, his expression a mix of defiance and grief. Mr. Julian Drake leaned against a bookcase, his polished charm replaced by a wary alertness. Dr. Evelyn Marsh sat in a corner, her notebook open but untouched, her gaze fixed on some distant point. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, rigid in her black morning dress, glared at the room as though daring anyone to speak. Miss Clara Thornton, the novelist, perched her system. I noticed the artifact content was cut off mid-sentence. Let me complete Chapter 3 properly, ensuring it meets the 1,400-word requirement and follows the guidelines for an Agatha Christie-style Poirot mystery. Chapter 3. The Arrival. The twilight air hung heavy over Sandy Cove Manor as Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace, his small, neat figure silhouetted against the fading glow of the horizon. The sea whispered below, its rhythm unbroken by the tragedy that had unfolded in the boathouse. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was thick with unease, the guests' voices hushed as they gathered in the drawing-room, awaiting the police's instructions. Captain Hastings, standing beside Poirot, shifted uncomfortably, his soldier's instincts bristling at the undercurrent of suspicion that seemed to permeate the very walls. Poirot's arrival had been, as always, impeccably timed. He had stepped off the train from London only an hour before Miss Thornton's cry had shattered the peace of Sandy Cove, summoned by a vague but insistent letter from Sir Reginald himself. The letter which Poirot had shown Hastings on the journey was cryptic, hinting at a matter of some delicacy that required the detective's unique talents. Now, with Sir Reginald dead, that delicacy had taken a far darker turn. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and measured, "the letter from Sir Reginald, it troubles me. He wrote of unease, of a shadow over his household. And now he lies dead. This is no coincidence, Hastings." Hastings frowned, glancing toward the drawing-room's tall windows where the guests' silhouettes moved like figures in a shadow play. "Do you think he suspected someone was plotting against him?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of intellectual curiosity. Perhaps, perhaps not. But Sir Reginald was a man of wealth and influence, and such men collect enemies as a magnet collects iron filings. We must discover what he feared, and who among this company had reason to silence him. They entered the drawing-room where Inspector Harrow was organizing his constables with brisk efficiency. The guests sat or stood in uneasy clusters, their faces a study in strained politeness. Lady Cresswell, seated on a velvet chaise, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Peter Langley stood by the fireplace, his hands thrust into his pockets, his expression a mix of defiance and grief. Mr. Julian Drake leaned against a bookcase, his polished charm replaced by a wary alertness. Dr. Evelyn Marsh sat in a corner, her notebook open but untouched, her gaze fixed on some distant point. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, rigid in her black mourning dress, glared at the room as though daring anyone to speak. Miss Clara Thornton, the novelist, paced near the French doors, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, as though already crafting the narrative of this grim affair. Miss Emily Pritchard, the secretary, hovered near a side table, her clipboard abandoned, her hands twisting nervously. Inspector Harrow, a stout man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor, was questioning Miss Thornton, who recounted her discovery of the body with a writer's precision. "I left my shawl in the boathouse this morning around 10 o'clock, she said, her voice steady now. "I returned to fetch it just before 5. That's when I found him. There was no one else there, no sounds, no movement." Poirot, standing quietly to one side, tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly as he absorbed her words. "Mademoiselle Thornton," he interjected, his tone polite but probing, "you say you left your shawl at 10. Were you alone in the boathouse then?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Lady Cresswell before answering. "Yes, alone. I was sketching the view. The boathouse is quiet, secluded." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Hastings knew that look. It meant his friend had already begun to catalogue inconsistencies, to weave the threads of this puzzle into a pattern only he could see. Inspector Harrow turned to the group. "I'll need statements from all of you. Times, places, who you saw and when. No one leaves the manor until we've sorted this out." His tone brooked no argument, and the guests murmured their assent, though their unease was palpable. Poirot drew Hastings aside, his voice a low murmur. "Observe, mon ami. The faces, the gestures, the silences, they speak louder than words. Someone here knows more than they say." Hastings glanced at the group. Lady Cresswell's handkerchief was now a crumpled ball in her hands, her composure fraying. Peter Langley's eyes darted toward the door as though longing to escape. Julian Drake's fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the bookcase, while Dr. Marsh's pencil remained poised above her notebook, unmoving. Mrs. Langley's lips were a tight line, her gaze fixed on her son. Miss Pritchard's nervous fidgeting had intensified, her eyes darting toward the clock which read 6:23 p.m. Poirot began his own inquiries, moving among the guests with the grace of a cat stalking its prey. He approached Lady Cresswell first, his manner deferential. "Madame, my condolences. May I ask when you last saw your husband?" She stiffened, her voice measured. "At tea, around 3:30, he was on the terrace with Mr. Drake and Miss Pritchard. I retired to my room shortly after to rest before dinner." "And you heard nothing unusual? No voices, no footsteps?" Poirot's eyes were sharp, though his tone was gentle. "Nothing," she replied too quickly. "I was asleep." Poirot nodded and moved to Peter Langley. "Monsieur, as Sir Reginald's heir, you stand to gain much. Where were you between 3 and 5 this afternoon?" Peter's jaw tightened. "In the gardens, walking. I needed air. I saw Dr. Marsh near the rose beds, but no one else." Dr. Marsh, overhearing, looked up sharply. "I was in the gardens, yes, but closer to 4. I was cataloguing the hydrangeas. I didn't see Mr. Langley." A murmur ran through the room, and Hastings noted the sudden tension in Peter's posture. Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he said nothing, moving on to Julian Drake. "Monsieur Drake, you discussed business with Sir Reginald. Was it a cordial discussion?" Drake's smile was thin. "Cordial enough. He was considering an investment, a risky one but potentially lucrative. We spoke on the terrace around 3:30. Then I returned to my room to review some papers. "And you saw no one after?" Poirot pressed. "No one," Drake said, his voice smooth but his eyes guarded. Poirot continued questioning Mrs. Langley, who claimed to have been in the library reading, and Miss Pritchard, who stammered that she'd been organizing Sir Reginald's correspondence in her office. Each answer was precise, yet Hastings sensed a rehearsed quality, as though the truth lay just beneath the surface. As the police took statements, Poirot returned to the boathouse, beckoning Hastings to follow. The scene was unchanged, the blood now dry, the telescope gleaming dully in the lantern light. Poirot crouched beside it, his gloved fingers hovering over the base. "The blow was struck from behind," he murmured. Sir Reginald was facing the window, perhaps looking out to sea. The telescope was taken from that table. See the dust mark where it stood. The killer moved swiftly with purpose. Hastings frowned. But the window was open. Could someone have come from outside? "Possible, but unlikely," Poirot replied. "The sand outside shows no clear prints, and the tide was rising. No, Hastings, I believe the killer was someone who knew the boathouse, someone who could move unnoticed." They returned to the manor where dinner had been postponed, the guests too shaken to eat. Poirot gathered them in the drawing room, his presence commanding silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and deliberate. "A crime has been committed, and the truth lies among you. I, Hercule Poirot, will find it, but I warn you, secrets do not remain hidden from me." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group like a storm cloud. Hastings watched their faces, noting the flicker of fear in Miss Pritchard's eyes, the tightening of Lady Cresswell's jaw, the subtle shift in Drake's posture. Poirot's little gray cells were at work, and Hastings knew the game had truly begun. As the clock struck 7, the manor seemed to close in around them, its walls whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot's gaze lingered on each guest, and Hastings felt a shiver of anticipation. The truth was close, but it would take all of Poirot's genius to bring it to light. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The drawing room of Sandy Cove Manor, with its high ceilings and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to shrink under the weight of suspicion as Hercule Poirot began his inquiries in earnest. The flickering light of the chandelier cast long shadows across the faces of the guests, each of whom sat or stood in a state of uneasy vigilance. Captain Hastings, positioned near the fireplace, watched his friend with a mixture of admiration and anticipation. Poirot's method, methodical, precise, almost theatrical, never failed to unsettle those who harbored secrets, and Hastings sensed that secrets abounded in this room. Inspector Harrow and his constables had retreated to the boathouse to oversee the removal of Sir Reginald's body, leaving Poirot to conduct his own investigation in parallel. The little Belgian detective stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour. His eyes, bright and unyielding, moved from one guest to another as though peeling back the layers of their carefully constructed facades. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding. "A crime has been committed, and the truth lies among you. I shall ask questions, and I expect answers, truthful answers. The little gray cells, they do not rest until the puzzle is complete. A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Lady Cresswell, seated on the chaise, adjusted her posture, her handkerchief now a crumpled relic in her lap. Peter Langley leaned against the mantel, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm. Julian Drake, standing near the bookcase, crossed his arms, his expression guarded. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her notebook now closed, sat with her hands folded, her eyes fixed on Poirot with a scientist's curiosity. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her black dress absorbing the light, stared straight ahead, her lips a thin line. Miss Clara Thornton, the novelist, had ceased her pacing and now leaned against the French doors, her sharp gaze following Poirot's every move. Miss Emily Pritchard, the secretary, hovered near the sideboard, her nervous fidgeting more pronounced. Poirot turned first to Miss Pritchard, whose pale face seemed to blanch further under his scrutiny. "Mademoiselle," he said, his tone gentle but probing. "You were Sir Reginald's secretary. You knew his habits, his correspondence, his confidences. Tell me, what was his state of mind in the days before his death?" Miss Pritchard's hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard, though it was now empty of papers. He was preoccupied," she stammered. "Sir Reginald was always busy, of course, with business matters and the estate, but lately he seemed agitated. He received several letters that upset him, though he wouldn't share their contents." "Letters?" Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "And where are these letters now?" "In his study, I believe," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He kept them locked in his desk." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And this afternoon, mademoiselle, where were you between 3 and 5 o'clock?" "I was in my office, organizing his correspondence," she said quickly. "I saw Sir Reginald on the terrace at 3:30, speaking with Mr. Drake. After that, I returned to my work." Poirot's gaze lingered on her, his silence more probing than any question. He then turned to Julian Drake, whose polished demeanor seemed to falter under the detective's scrutiny. "Monsieur Drake, you discussed business with Sir Reginald. What was the nature of this discussion?" Drake's smile was tight, his fingers adjusting his cufflinks. "A potential investment in a shipping venture." Sir Reginald was cautious but interested. "We spoke on the terrace around 3:30, as Miss Pritchard said. Afterward, I went to my room to review some documents." "And you saw no one else?" Poirot pressed, his eyes narrowing. "No one," Drake replied, though his glance flickered toward Lady Cresswell, who looked away. Poirot moved to Lady Cresswell, his manner softening. "Madame, you said you retired to your room after tea. Did you see or hear anything unusual before the discovery of the body?" Lady Cresswell's green eyes met his, her voice steady but strained. "Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I was resting. The manor is quiet in the afternoons." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Peter Langley. "Monsieur Langley, as Sir Reginald's heir, you had much to gain from his death. Where were you during this critical time?" Peter's jaw tightened, his hands clenching in his pockets. "I told you I was in the gardens walking. I needed to clear my head. I saw Dr. Marsh near the rose beds around 4, but no one else." Dr. Marsh adjusted her spectacles, her voice calm but precise. "I was in the gardens, yes, but closer to 4:15. I was examining the hydrangeas for my catalogue. I didn't see Mr. Langley." A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock, which read 7:42 p.m. Hastings noted the discrepancy in Peter's alibi, his mind racing with possibilities. Poirot, however, moved on to Mrs. Langley, whose severe expression seemed to challenge him to find fault. "Madame," Poirot said, "you were in the library reading. Did you see or hear anything of note?" Mrs. Langley's voice was cold. "I was absorbed in my book. The library is at the far end of the manor. I heard nothing, saw nothing." Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he said nothing, turning instead to Miss Thornton. "Mademoiselle, you have the writer's eye for detail. When you entered the boathouse, was there anything at all that struck you as unusual beyond the body?" Miss Thornton hesitated, her fingers tightening on her shawl. "The telescope," she said slowly. "It was out of place. I noticed it this morning when I left my shawl. It was on the table, not near the bench where I found it." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as a spark of interest. "Most interesting, mademoiselle. And the window, was it open when you were there this morning?" She frowned, thinking. "No, it was closed. I'm certain of it." The room seemed to hold its breath as Poirot nodded, his mind clearly at work. He stepped back, addressing the group as a whole. "Each of you has given me a piece of the puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. I ask you to remain vigilant, to speak the truth, for the truth will emerge, as it always does." Inspector Harrow re-entered the room, his face grim. "The body's been taken for examination," he announced. "Preliminary findings suggest Sir Reginald was killed between 3:30 and 4:30 this afternoon. The blow was struck from behind, likely with the telescope. We're searching the boathouse and grounds for further evidence." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Inspector. May I suggest a thorough search of Sir Reginald's study? The letters Mademoiselle Pritchard mentioned may hold answers." Harrow nodded, dispatching a constable to the task. Poirot then beckoned Hastings to follow him to the terrace, where the night air was cool and sharp, with the scent of the sea. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Hastings asked, his voice low. "They all seem to have alibis, but something's off." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "The alibis, they are too neat, too precise. And yet there are contradictions, small but significant. The telescope, the window, the letters. These are the threads we must follow. The killer is among them, Hastings, and already they betray themselves with their words." As they returned to the drawing room, Hastings felt a surge of anticipation. Poirot's little gray cells were weaving their magic, and the truth, though still hidden, was drawing closer. The guests, unaware of the net tightening around them, resumed their guarded conversations. But Hastings knew that Poirot's questions had only just begun. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The atmosphere in Sandy Cove Manor had grown oppressive by the following morning, as though the very walls absorbed the suspicion that hung over its inhabitants. The sun rose over the Devon coast, its light filtering through the heavy drapes of the drawing room, where the guests had gathered once more. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in a fresh linen suit, stood near the fireplace, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the assembly with a quiet intensity that made even the innocent shift uncomfortably. Captain Hastings, seated near the window, noted the strain in the room, the way eyes avoided meeting, the way hands fidgeted with teacups or cufflinks. The murder of Sir Reginald Cresswell had cast a shadow, and Poirot was determined to pierce it. Inspector Harrow had returned with new information, his weathered face set in a frown as he addressed the group. "We've examined the boathouse thoroughly," he announced, his voice gruff. "The telescope is confirmed as the murder weapon. Traces of Sir Reginald's blood and hair were found on its base. The blow was struck with considerable force, likely from behind, between 3:30 and 4:30 yesterday afternoon. We also found a cigarette stub near the boathouse door, still fresh. Anyone here smoke?" A ripple of unease passed through the room. Julian Drake raised a hand, his expression smooth but cautious. "I do, Inspector, but I wasn't near the boathouse after my talk with Sir Reginald on the terrace. I smoked in my room by the window." Harrow's eyes narrowed. "We'll need to confirm that, Mr. Drake. Anyone else?" No one else admitted to smoking, though Hastings noted a fleeting glance between Peter Langley and his mother, Mrs. Beatrice Langley. Poirot, too, seemed to catch it, his mustache twitching slightly as he filed the observation away. The inspector continued, "We also found a partial footprint in the sand just outside the boathouse window. Not clear enough to identify, but it suggests someone may have entered or exited that way. The tides erased most of it, but it's something." Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding attention. "Merci, Inspector. This cigarette stub, this footprint, they are most interesting. But let us not be too quick to assume their importance. The truth, it hides in the details, but it is also obscured by them. We must proceed with care." Hastings knew this tone. Poirot was already sifting through the evidence, separating the significant from the misleading. The cigarette stub and footprint were classic red herrings designed to distract the less discerning mind. But Poirot's little gray cells were not so easily swayed. The detective turned to the group, his gaze settling on Peter Langley, whose restless energy seemed barely contained. "Monsieur Langley," Poirot said, "you were in the gardens, you say, between 3 and 5. Yet Dr. Marsh, she places you elsewhere, or rather does not place you at all. Can you clarify your movements?" Peter's jaw tightened, his hands clenching in his pockets. "I told you I was walking. The gardens are large, acres of paths and hedges. I didn't see Dr. Marsh and she didn't see me, that's all." Dr. Evelyn Marsh adjusted her spectacles, her voice steady. "I was precise about my time, Monsieur Poirot. I was near the hydrangeas from 4 to 4:30. If Mr. Langley was in the gardens, he was not near me." A murmur ran through the room, and Hastings noted the flush creeping up Peter's neck. Poirot's eyes gleamed, but he moved on to Lady Cresswell, whose composure seemed to fray with each passing moment. "Madam, your husband received letters that troubled him, according to Mademoiselle Pritchard. Did he share their contents with you?" Lady Cresswell's green eyes flickered, her fingers tightening on her handkerchief. "No, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald was private about his business affairs. He mentioned nothing about letters." Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable, and turned to Miss Emily Pritchard. "Mademoiselle, you spoke of these letters. Were they from someone in this room, perhaps?" Miss Pritchard's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. I don't know. Sir Reginald didn't say. He locked them in his desk and told me not to speak of them." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who seemed to be savoring the tension, letting it build. The detective then addressed Miss Clara Thornton, whose sharp wit had been subdued since her discovery of the body. "Mademoiselle Thornton, you are a writer of mysteries, non? You understand the art of deception. The telescope, you said, was out of place. Can you recall anything else from the boathouse, any detail, however small?" Miss Thornton hesitated, her eyes narrowing as though replaying the scene in her mind. "There was a smell," she said slowly. "Not just the sea or the damp wood. Something sharp like perfume or cologne. It was faint, but it struck me, as odd Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Perfume, you say? Most intriguing. Did you recognize it?" "No," she admitted. "It was unfamiliar, but it lingered in the air." The guests exchanged glances, and Hastings noted Lady Cresswell's sudden stillness, her hand pausing mid-motion. Mrs. Langley's lips pursed, and Julian Drake's fingers stopped their restless tapping. Poirot, however, moved on, questioning Mrs. Langley about her time in the library and Dr. Marsh about her botanical work. Each answer met with his characteristic nod and silence. As the morning wore on, Inspector Harrow's men returned from Sir Reginald's study, bearing a locked box that Miss Pritchard identified as the one containing the letters. Harrow produced a key, found in Sir Reginald's pocket, and opened it to reveal 3 envelopes, each addressed in a different hand. Poirot examined them without touching, his eyes narrowing. "These must be read with care, Inspector," he said. "They may hold the key to Sir Reginald's fears and his death." Harrow agreed to share the contents later after forensic examination. Poirot, undeterred, continued his inquiries, focusing now on alibis and timelines. He requested a map of the estate, which Miss Pritchard provided, and began marking the guests' reported locations between 3 and 5 o'clock. The terrace, the gardens, the library, the study, each place was plotted with precision, yet the gaps in the timelines were glaring. Peter Langley's alibi remained shaky, contradicted by Dr. Marsh. Lady Cresswell's claim of sleeping seemed too convenient. Drake's solitary time in his room was unverified, and Miss Thornton's keen observation of the perfume added a new layer of intrigue. Poirot stepped back, studying the map. "The boathouse," he murmured to Hastings. "It is isolated, yet not inaccessible. The killer chose it for a reason, privacy perhaps, or opportunity, but the telescope, the perfume, the open window, these are not random. They are the signature of a mind that plans yet overlooks the smallest detail." Hastings frowned. "You think the cigarette stub and footprint are distractions?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice low. "Or perhaps they are clues misread by those who see only the surface. The cigarette, it points to Monsieur Drake, but too obviously. The footprint, it suggests an outsider, yet the tide erases certainty. We must look deeper, Hastings." As the guests dispersed for a late breakfast, Poirot lingered, his eyes fixed on the map. Hastings knew that look. The little gray cells were at work, piecing together the puzzle. The red herrings were multiplying, but Poirot's focus was unyielding. Somewhere in the alibis, the glances, the half-truths, the truth was hiding. And Hastings had no doubt his friend would find it. The clock struck 11, and the manor seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation in this deadly game of deception. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The morning sun climbed higher over Sandy Cove Manor, its rays piercing the heavy clouds that had begun to gather above the Devon coast. The air was thick with the promise of rain, mirroring the growing tension within the manor's walls. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, stood in the boathouse once more, his small frame dwarfed by the cavernous space, yet commanding it with his presence. Captain Hastings followed closely, his notebook open, ready to jot down any observation Poirot deemed significant. The boathouse, now cordoned off by Inspector Harrow's men, was a silent witness to the crime, its damp planks and salt-stained walls holding secrets that Poirot was determined to coax into the light. The previous day's revelations, the cigarette stub, the partial footprint, the mysterious letters, had stirred the guests into a state of guarded agitation. Poirot, however, was not swayed by the obvious. The red herrings, Hastings, he had said earlier that morning. They are like the waves that obscure the shore. We must look beneath to the truth that lies steady and unmoved. Now, as they stood in the boathouse, Poirot's sharp eyes scanned every detail. The telescope, now in police custody, had left a faint outline of dust on the table where it had stood, a mute testament to its role in Sir Reginald's death. The open window, its latch still undone, admitted a faint breeze that carried the scent of the sea, and perhaps something else. Poirot paused, his head tilted, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Hastings," he said softly, "do you smell it?" Hastings sniffed the air, frowning. "The sea, mostly. Damp wood, perhaps." Poirot shook his head, his mustache twitching. "Non, mon ami, there is something more, a trace, faint but distinct. The perfume Mademoiselle Thornton described. It lingers still, does it not?" Hastings inhaled again, more carefully this time, and caught a whiff of something sharp and floral, almost masked by the briny air. "You're right," he said, surprised. "It's subtle, but it's there. Could it be from one of the guests?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "This perfume, it is a clue, a small detail, but one that betrays the presence of the killer. We must discover its source." They moved to the window where Poirot examined the latch with care. "The window was closed this morning," Mademoiselle Thornton said, "yet open when she found the body. This suggests the killer opened it, perhaps to escape, perhaps to create the illusion of an outsider. But the sand outside, it tells us little thanks to the tide." Hastings nodded, his mind racing. The footprint Inspector Harrow mentioned. It was too vague to be useful, wasn't it? "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. "But even a vague clue has its purpose. It draws the eye, distracts the mind. We must focus on what is certain." They returned to the manor where the guests were gathered in the library, a grand room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture. Inspector Harrow had shared the contents of the letters found in Sir Reginald's desk, and their revelations had sent ripples of unease through the group. The first letter, written in a bold, masculine hand, was from a business associate warning Sir Reginald of financial ruin if he pursued a risky investment, likely the shipping venture Julian Drake had mentioned. The second, in a more delicate script, hinted at a personal betrayal, though its author was unnamed. The third, scrawled in an unsteady hand, was an anonymous threat. "You will pay for your sins, Cresswell. The truth will find you." Poirot, holding the letters with gloved hands, studied them with the intensity of a scholar deciphering an ancient text. "These letters," he said, addressing the group, "they tell a story of fear and secrets. Sir Reginald was a man under pressure, financial, personal, perhaps moral, Who among you knew of these pressures? The guests exchanged wary glances. Lady Cresswell's face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I knew nothing of these letters, she said, her voice low. Reginald kept his troubles to himself. Julian Drake cleared his throat, his polished demeanor strained. The first letter likely refers to the shipping venture. I warned Sir Reginald it was risky, but he was determined. I had no knowledge of the others. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, Monsieur Drake, you smoked a cigarette, did you not? The stub found near the boathouse. It is of the same brand you favor, oui? Drake's smile faltered. As I told the inspector, I smoked in my room. Anyone could have taken a cigarette from my case. It was on the terrace table during tea. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Miss Thornton. Mademoiselle, this perfume you noticed, can you describe it further? Was it floral, perhaps, or something more exotic? Miss Thornton frowned, her sharp mind working. Floral, yes, but with a bitter edge, like jasmine mixed with something sharper. Bergamot, perhaps. It was distinctive, not a common scent. Poirot's gaze swept over the group, lingering on Lady Cresswell, whose hand twitched slightly, and Mrs. Langley, whose lips pursed as though suppressing a retort. Most interesting, he murmured. We shall return to this perfume. He then approached Peter Langley, whose restless energy seemed to have intensified. Monsieur Langley, your alibi remains uncertain. Dr. Marsh did not see you in the gardens, yet you insist you were there. Can you recall any detail, any small thing that might confirm your presence? Peter's eyes darted to his mother, then back to Poirot. I remember the roses were in full bloom. There was a bee buzzing around them. I swatted it away. Dr. Marsh adjusted her spectacles, her voice precise. The roses were indeed blooming, but I saw no bees. The wind was strong yesterday. It would have kept them away. A tense silence followed, and Hastings noted the flush creeping up Peter's neck. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of satisfaction, but he moved on to Mrs. Langley. Madame, you were in the library. Did you hear any sounds from the gardens or the terrace? Mrs. Langley's voice was cold. Nothing. The library is at the back of the manor, far from the boathouse. I was reading, as I said. Poirot nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before turning to Miss Pritchard. Mademoiselle, you were in your office organizing papers. Did you see anyone pass by, perhaps on their way to the boathouse? Miss Pritchard's hands trembled, her voice barely audible. I saw Mr. Langley, Peter, crossing the lawn toward the gardens around 3:45. But I was busy. I didn't watch him long. Peter's head snapped up. You're mistaken, Emily. I was deeper in the gardens by then. Poirot's eyes gleamed, the contradiction noted. He stepped back, addressing the group. The details, mesdames et messieurs, they are the key. A perfume, a letter, a bee that was not there. These are the threads of truth. I urge you to speak what you know, for the truth will not remain hidden. As the guests dispersed, their alibis and stories fraying under Poirot's scrutiny, Hastings followed his friend to the terrace. That perfume, Hastings said. It's a real clue, isn't it? Not like the cigarette or the footprint. Oui, mon ami, Poirot replied, his voice soft but certain. The cigarette, the footprint, they are distractions perhaps planted by a clever mind. But the perfume, it is personal, intimate. It belongs to someone in this house, and it will lead us to the killer. The clock in the hall struck noon, and the manor seemed to pulse with secrets. Poirot's little gray cells were weaving their web, and Hastings knew that the truth, though still elusive, was drawing ever closer. Chapter 7. More Lies. Surface. The sky above Sandy Cove Manor had darkened by noon. Heavy clouds rolling in from the sea, their shadows casting a pall over the estate. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, and within the manor's oak-paneled library, the atmosphere was no less stormy. Hercule Poirot, his small frame radiating quiet authority, stood before a large map of the estate, his finger tracing the path from the terrace to the boathouse. Captain Hastings, seated nearby, watched his friend with a mixture of awe and impatience, knowing that Poirot's methodical mind was piecing together the puzzle of Sir Reginald Cresswell's murder. The guests, summoned once more, sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a gallery of unease. Lady Cresswell's delicate features were taut, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Peter Langley leaned forward, his athletic frame tense, his eyes darting between Poirot and his mother, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, whose severe expression seemed carved in stone. Julian Drake, his polished charm fraying, adjusted his tie repeatedly, while Dr. Evelyn Marsh clutched her notebook, her gaze fixed on Poirot with clinical curiosity. Miss Clara Thornton, the novelist, sat with a notepad of her own, her pen poised as though documenting the scene for her next book. Miss Emily Pritchard, the secretary, hovered at the edge of the group, her nervous fidgeting now almost a tic. Inspector Harrow stood by the door, his weathered face grim as he shared the latest findings. "The letters from Sir Reginald's desk have been analyzed," he said. The first, about the shipping venture, was from a Mr. Harold Vance, a known associate of Mr. Drake's. The second, hinting at betrayal, was in a woman's hand, unidentified. The third, the threat, had no fingerprints but Sir Reginald's. "We're still tracing its origin." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Merci, Inspector. These letters, they are windows into Sir Reginald's mind and his enemies. But it is the living, not the paper, that will reveal the truth." He turned to the group, his voice calm but piercing. "Mesdames et messieurs, the lies, they multiply. Alibis shift, details contradict. Let us examine them closely, for the truth hides in the cracks." Poirot's gaze settled on Peter Langley, whose earlier claim of being in the gardens had been challenged by Dr. Marsh and Miss Pritchard. "Monsieur Langley," Poirot said, "you insist you were in the gardens, yet Mademoiselle Pritchard saw you crossing the lawn at 3:45, and Dr. Marsh saw no one. There is a gap in your story. What were you doing?" Peter's flush deepened, his voice sharp. "I told you I was walking. The gardens are vast. I could have been anywhere. Emily's mistaken about the time." Miss Pritchard's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "I'm certain, Mr. Langley, it was 3:45 by my watch. You were heading toward the path to the boathouse." A gasp escaped Lady Cresswell, quickly stifled. Poirot's mustache twitched, his attention shifting to her. "Madame, you were asleep, you say, during this time. Yet your reaction suggests you know more. Did you see Monsieur Langley, perhaps?" Lady Cresswell's green eyes flashed, her voice steady but strained. "I was in my room, Monsieur Poirot. I saw nothing." Poirot nodded, his silence more probing than any question. He turned to Julian Drake, whose cigarette stub had become a point of contention. "Monsieur Drake, your cigarette was found near the boathouse. You claim it was taken from your case left on the terrace. Who had access to it? Drake's smile was thin, his fingers stilling on his tie. Anyone on the terrace during tea. Lady Cresswell, Miss Thornton, Sir Reginald, Miss Pritchard, even Peter was there briefly. Peter's head snapped up. I don't smoke, Drake, you know that. Do I? Drake replied, his tone cool. You were awfully close to my case when we were talking. The accusation hung in the air, and Hastings noted Mrs. Langley's sharp intake of breath. Poirot's eyes gleamed, sensing the fracture in their unity. He turned to Miss Thornton, whose observation of the perfume had lingered in his mind. Mademoiselle, this scent you described, jasmine and bergamot. Have you noticed it on anyone here? Miss Thornton hesitated, her sharp eyes scanning the group. Not precisely, she said, but it's familiar, like something I've smelled in passing. Perhaps in the drawing room yesterday. Poirot's gaze flicked to Lady Cresswell, whose hand tightened on her chair. Madame, you favor a perfume, non? May I inquire its nature? Lady Cresswell's lips parted, then closed. I use a floral scent, yes, she said carefully. Jasmine primarily, but it's common enough. Common, perhaps, Poirot murmured, but distinctive in its combination. We shall see. The room grew quieter, the guests' guarded glances betraying their unease. Poirot then addressed Dr. Marsh, whose calm demeanor seemed unshaken. Mademoiselle, your work in the gardens? Did you notice anything unusual beyond the absence of bees? Dr. Marsh adjusted her spectacles, her voice precise. The hydrangeas were disturbed, some petals crushed as though someone had stepped through them. I noticed it around 4:15, but I thought little of it at the time. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Disturbed, you say? Near the path to the boathouse? Yes, she replied. It could have been a gardener, but none were scheduled that afternoon. The revelation sent a ripple through the group, and Hastings jotted it down, his mind racing. Poirot turned to Mrs. Langley, whose rigid posture seemed to challenge his scrutiny. Madam, your son's movements are uncertain. Did you see him at any point after 3:30? Mrs. Langley's voice was cold. I was in the library, as I said. I saw no one until dinner was announced. Poirot nodded, his eyes lingering on her, then moved to Miss Pritchard. Mademoiselle, you saw Monsieur Langley at 3:45. Did you see anyone else near the boathouse or the path? Miss Pritchard's hands trembled, her voice faltering. I thought I saw someone near the cliffs, just a shadow moving quickly. It was around 4, but I couldn't be sure. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A shadow, you say? Most intriguing. He stepped back, addressing the group. The lies, they unravel. A cigarette, a footprint, a perfume, a crushed flower. These are not mere details, but threads in a tapestry of deception. Someone here knows the truth, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find it. As the guests dispersed, their alibis crumbling under Poirot's relentless probing, Hastings followed him to the terrace. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the stone balustrade. Poirot, Hastings said, Peter's alibi is falling apart, and that perfume. Lady Cresswell seemed rattled when you mentioned it. Oui, mon ami, Poirot replied, his voice soft but certain. The perfume is a key, but not the only one. The letters speak of betrayal, the flowers of a hidden path, the shadow of a secret. The killer is clever, but they have left too many traces. He paused, his gaze fixed on the boathouse in the distance. We must examine the study more closely, Hastings. The letters, they are not all they seem, and the shadow Mademoiselle Pritchard saw, it may be the key to the killer's movements. As the rain intensified, cloaking the manor in a gray veil, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery deepening. The lies were surfacing, but the truth remained just out of reach, waiting for Poirot's little gray cells to bring it into the light. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The rain had settled into a steady patter by mid-afternoon, cloaking Sandy Cove Manor in a gray veil that seemed to mirror the gloom within its walls. The library, with its towering bookshelves and heavy air, was a fitting stage for the mounting tension among the guests. Hercule Poirot, his cream suit pristine despite the damp, stood before the fireplace, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a predator closing in on its prey. Captain Hastings, seated near a rain-streaked window, felt the atmosphere crackle with unspoken truths, as though the manor itself were urging its secrets to surface. The guests, summoned once more, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces etched with strain. Lady Cresswell's delicate hands trembled slightly, her green eyes darting to the door as if expecting rescue. Peter Langley slouched in his chair, his earlier defiance replaced by a sullen wariness. Julian Drake, his polished veneer cracking, adjusted his cufflinks with a nervous twitch. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her notebook open but untouched, watched Poirot with a scientist's detachment, though her fingers betrayed a slight tremor. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, rigid in her black dress, glared at the group as though holding them all responsible for her brother-in-law's death. Miss Clara Thornton, the novelist, scribbled furiously in her notepad, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Miss Emily Pritchard, the secretary, stood near the back, her clipboard abandoned, her face pale and drawn. Inspector Harrow, his weathered face set in a scowl, had shared new findings. The cigarette stub near the boathouse bore traces of lipstick, a detail that had sent a ripple of shock through the room. "Only 2 of you ladies admit to wearing lipstick," Harrow said, his gaze settling on Lady Cresswell and Miss Thornton. "Care to explain?" Lady Cresswell's lips parted, her voice sharp. "I wear lipstick, yes, but I don't smoke. And I was in my room, as I've said." Miss Thornton's eyes narrowed, her pen pausing. "I smoke occasionally, Inspector, but not yesterday, and I certainly didn't leave a cigarette in the boathouse." Poirot, silent until now, stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, the clues, they multiply, but so do the contradictions. A cigarette with lipstick, a perfume in the boathouse, a shadow on the cliffs. These are not mere details, but signposts to the truth. And now one of you will break, for the weight of lies is heavy." He turned to Miss Pritchard, whose nervous fidgeting had reached a fever pitch. "Mademoiselle," he said, his tone gentle but unrelenting, "you saw a shadow near the cliffs at 4 o'clock. You have been hesitant, fearful. What is it you hide?" Miss Pritchard's hands flew to her face, her voice breaking. I can't. It's too much." She sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The room froze, every eye on her. Hastings leaned forward, his heart racing, sensing the turning point Poirot had anticipated. "Speak, mademoiselle," Poirot urged, his voice soft but insistent. "The truth will free you, even if it pains others." Miss Pritchard's sobs quieted, her voice trembling as she spoke. I lied about the shadow. It wasn't a shadow, it was Lady Cresswell. I saw her near the cliffs, heading toward the boathouse just before 4. She was moving quickly, looking around as if she didn't want to be seen. A gasp tore through the room. Lady Cresswell's face drained of color, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "That's absurd!" she cried, her voice high and brittle. "I was in my room asleep. Emily, how could you say such a thing?" Miss Pritchard's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Lady Cresswell, but I saw you. I didn't want to say, but I can't keep it in any longer." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. "Merci, Mademoiselle Pritchard. Your courage, it is commendable." "Madame Cresswell, how do you explain this?" Lady Cresswell's composure shattered, her voice rising. "She's lying. I was in my room, I swear it. Why would I go to the boathouse? Reginald was my husband." Peter Langley leapt to his feet, his face flushed. "Enough, Emily. You're trying to pin this on her because you're scared. What were you doing near the cliffs?" Miss Pritchard flinched, her voice barely audible. I was checking the postbox. Sir Reginald asked me to fetch any late deliveries." Poirot's gaze shifted to Peter, his voice sharp. "Monsieur Langley, your temper, it betrays you. You too were seen near the boathouse path by Mademoiselle Pritchard. Your alibi crumbles. What were you hiding?" Peter's hands clenched, his voice low. "I wasn't hiding anything. I was in the gardens, like I said. Emily's confused. She's always been nervous, prone to mistakes." Mrs. Langley's voice cut through the room, cold and commanding. "Peter, be silent. This is nonsense. Emily, you've worked for Reginald for years. Why turn on us now?" Miss Pritchard's sobs resumed, her words choked. "I'm not turning on anyone. I can't lie anymore. I saw what I saw." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough. The truth, it emerges, painful though it may be. Madame Cresswell, Monsieur Langley, your stories are at odds with others, and the perfume, jasmine and bergamot, it points to you, madame. Did you visit the boathouse?" Lady Cresswell's eyes blazed. "I did not. I use jasmine, yes, but so do many women. This is a witch hunt." Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. "The perfume, the lipstick, the shadow, these are not accusations, but questions. And questions demand answers." He turned to Julian Drake, whose nervous fidgeting had intensified. "Monsieur Drake, your cigarette stub, it bears lipstick, yet you claim no knowledge. Did you see anyone take your cigarettes?" Drake's smile was strained. "As I said, they were on the terrace. Anyone could have taken one. I didn't see." Miss Thornton, her voice sharp, interjected. "That's convenient, Mr. Drake. You're quick to point fingers elsewhere. What about your business with Sir Reginald? Was it as innocent as you claim?" Drake's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Miss Thornton. You're not writing a novel now. My business was legitimate." Poirot's eyes twinkled, sensing the cracks widening. He turned to Dr. Marsh, whose calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the other's agitation. "Mademoiselle, the crushed hydrangeas. Did you see anyone near them? Perhaps someone hurrying?" Dr. Marsh adjusted her spectacles, her voice steady. "No one, Monsieur Poirot, but the petals were freshly crushed, as if someone had passed through just before I arrived." The room fell silent, the weight of Miss Pritchard's confession and the mounting contradictions pressing down on the group. Hastings jotted down the details, his mind racing. Lady Cresswell's presence near the boathouse, Peter's shaky alibi, the lipstick on the cigarette. These were not mere threads. but ropes tightening around the guilty. Poirot stepped back, addressing the group. The lies, they unravel. One of you has broken and others will follow. The truth is near, mesdames et messieurs. I urge you to speak before it is too late. As the guests dispersed, their faces pale and drawn, Hastings followed Poirot to the terrace, where the rain had softened to a drizzle. "That was a breakthrough, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low. "Miss Pritchard's confession, it changes everything." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes fixed on the boathouse in the distance. "The emotional weight, it cracks the facade, but we are not yet at the truth. Lady Cresswell, she hides something, perhaps love, perhaps fear, and Monsieur Langley, his anger betrays him. The perfume, the petals, the shadow, these will lead us to the killer." The clock struck 3, and the manor seemed to pulse with the promise of revelation. Poirot's little gray cells were closing in, and Hastings knew the next move would be decisive. Chapter 9. The Trap. The rain had ceased by late afternoon, leaving Sandy Cove Manor shrouded in a damp, heavy silence that seemed to amplify the tension within its walls. The drawing room, with its ornate chandelier and velvet drapes, was a stage for Hercule Poirot's next move. A carefully orchestrated trap designed to unravel the web of lies surrounding Sir Reginald Cresswell's murder. Captain Hastings stood near the French doors, his notebook open, his eyes fixed on Poirot, who stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating an almost palpable authority. The guests, summoned yet again, sat in a tense circle, their faces pale, their postures rigid with anticipation and dread. Poirot's eyes, bright and unyielding, swept over the assembly. Lady Cresswell, her hands clasped tightly, her green eyes shadowed with fear. Peter Langley, his athletic frame slouched, his gaze flickering with defiance. Julian Drake, his polished charm now a thin veneer over nervous agitation. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her notebook closed, her expression one of guarded curiosity. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her black dress stark against the room's opulence, her lips a tight line. Miss Clara Thornton, her sharp eyes narrowed, her pen poised as if to capture every word. And Miss Emily Pritchard, her nervous trembling subdued but not gone, her face pale as she avoided Lady Cresswell's gaze. Inspector Harrow stood by the fireplace, his weathered face set in a scowl, his arms crossed. He had agreed to let Poirot take the lead, sensing that the little Belgian's methods, though unorthodox, were closing in on the truth. "Monsieur Poirot," Harrow said, his voice gruff, "you've got the floor. Let's see what you make of this mess." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Merci, Inspector. Mesdames et messieurs, the time for games is over. A man is dead, struck down in the boathouse with a telescope, and the truth lies among you. Tonight I shall lay a trap, not with force, but with the mind. The guilty will reveal themselves, for the little gray cells they do not air." A murmur of unease rippled through the room, and Hastings felt a thrill of anticipation. Poirot's traps were legendary, designed to exploit the psychology of the guilty, to press until their facades crumbled. He began by addressing the group as a whole, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Let us review the facts," Poirot said, pacing slowly. "Sir Reginald was killed between 3:30 and 4:30, struck from behind with a telescope. The window was open, suggesting an escape, yet the tide erased any clear footprints. A cigarette stub with lipstick was found, pointing to Monsieur Drake or one of the ladies. A perfume, jasmine and bergamot, lingered in the boathouse, noted by Mademoiselle Thornton. Crushed hydrangeas marked a path, observed by Mademoiselle Marsh, and a shadow seen by Mademoiselle Pritchard revealed Madame Cresswell near the cliffs. Lady Cresswell's head snapped up, her voice sharp. "I told you I was in my room. Emily is mistaken." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "Patience, madame. The truth, it emerges slowly. Let us consider the letters found in Sir Reginald's desk. One spoke of financial ruin tied to Monsieur Drake's venture. Another hinted at betrayal in a woman's hand. The third was a threat, anonymous but chilling. These letters, they are the key to Sir Reginald's fears and his death." He turned to Julian Drake, whose fingers twitched at his cufflinks. "Monsieur Drake, your cigarette stub is most convenient. You claim it was taken from your case, yet no one confirms this. And your business with Sir Reginald, was it truly as innocent as you say?" Drake's smile was strained. "I've told you everything, Poirot. The venture was risky, yes, but Sir Reginald was keen. I had no reason to harm him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "No reason, perhaps, but opportunity. You were on the terrace, close to the boathouse path." He turned to Lady Cresswell, whose composure was fraying. "Madame, the perfume, jasmine and bergamot, it is yours, no? And Mademoiselle Pritchard saw you near the cliffs, not in your room. Why were you there?" Lady Cresswell's hands trembled, her voice rising. "I was in my room. I don't know why Emily would lie, but I was not near the boathouse." Miss Pritchard, her face pale, shook her head. "I saw you, Lady Cresswell. I'm sorry, but I did." Peter Langley leapt to his feet, his voice thick with anger. "Stop it, Emily. You're trying to frame her. What about you? Always skulking around listening at doors." Poirot's gaze sharpened, his voice cutting through the tension. "Monsieur Langley, your alibi is weak. Mademoiselle Pritchard saw you near the boathouse path at 3:45. Dr. Marsh saw no bees contradicting your story of the gardens. What were you doing?" Peter's flush deepened, his hands clenching. "I was walking, I told you. I didn't go near the boathouse." Mrs. Langley's voice was cold as ice. "Peter, sit down. This is nonsense. Monsieur Poirot, my son is no murderer." Poirot's eyes gleamed, sensing the pressure building. He turned to Miss Thornton, whose sharp observation had sparked his interest. "Mademoiselle, the perfume. You said it was familiar, perhaps from the drawing room. Have you recalled anything more?" Miss Thornton hesitated, her eyes flicking to Lady Cresswell. "It's possible. I smelled it near Lady Cresswell during tea yesterday, but I can't be certain." Lady Cresswell's face flushed, her voice breaking. "This is outrageous. You're all conspiring against me. I loved Reginald." The room fell silent, her words hanging like a confession. Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but relentless. "Madame, love can drive many actions, some noble, some desperate. Did you love Sir Reginald or did you fear him? The letter of a betrayal, was it yours?" Lady Cresswell's eyes filled with tears, her voice a whisper. I wrote no such letter, but Reginald was not the man he seemed. He was cruel, controlling. I was trapped in this marriage, but I didn't kill him." The admission sent a shock wave through the room. Hastings jotted it down, his heart racing. Poirot had cracked the facade, but was it the truth or another layer of deception? He turned to Dr. Marsh, whose calm demeanor stood out amid the chaos. "Mademoiselle, the crushed hydrangeas. "Did you see anyone near the path?" Dr. Marsh's voice was steady. "No one, but the petals were freshly crushed as if someone had passed through moments before." Poirot nodded, his trap tightening. He addressed the group, his voice rising. "The clues, they point to many, yet only one is guilty. The perfume, the cigarette, the shadow, the petals. These are not random. Someone in this room struck Sir Reginald, and I, Hercule Poirot, know who. But I give you one chance to confess before I reveal all." The silence was deafening, every eye on Poirot. Lady Cresswell's tears fell silently, Peter's fists clenched, Drake's face paled, and Miss Pritchard's trembling intensified. Mrs. Langley's gaze was steely, Miss Thornton's pen froze, and Dr. Marsh's eyes narrowed as if calculating. No one spoke. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of satisfaction. "Very well," he said. "The trap is set. Tomorrow we shall gather again, and the truth will be laid bare." As the guests dispersed, their faces drawn with fear and suspicion, Hastings followed Poirot to the terrace. The sea was calm now, its whispers drowned by the weight of the moment. "You've got them rattled, Poirot," Hastings said. "Lady Cresswell's admission, that was a breakthrough." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "The trap, it works. The guilty feel the pressure, and soon they will break. The perfume, the letter, the shadow, they point to the heart of this crime. Tomorrow we shall see." The clock struck 6, and the manor seemed to hold its breath, awaiting Poirot's final move. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing-room of Sandycove Manor was steeped in a hushed expectancy, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and the faint tang of the sea drifting through the open French doors. The late afternoon light filtered through the remnants of the morning's clouds cast a soft glow over the gathered guests, their faces taut with anticipation and dread. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of calm amid the storm of suspicion. His mustache was perfectly groomed, his cream suit pristine, and his eyes gleamed with the certainty of a man who had unraveled the puzzle. Captain Hastings, seated near the fireplace, clutched his notebook, his heart pounding as he awaited the dramatic denouement that Poirot had promised. The guests sat in a tense semicircle. Lady Cresswell, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Peter Langley, his defiance replaced by a wary stillness. Julian Drake, his polished charm reduced to a nervous twitch. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her notebook closed, her gaze steady but guarded. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her black dress absorbing the light, her expression unyielding. Miss Clara Thornton, her sharp eyes fixed on Poirot as if analyzing his every word. And Miss Emily Pritchard, her nervous trembling subdued, her face pale with the weight of her earlier confession. Inspector Harrow stood by the door, his arms crossed, his weathered face betraying a grudging respect for Poirot's methods. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, "we have reached the moment of truth. A man, Sir Reginald Cresswell, lies dead, struck down in the boathouse with a telescope. The clues, the cigarette, the perfume, the crushed petals, the shadow, have led us through a maze of lies. But now the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot have found the path to the killer." A murmur rippled through the room, quickly silenced by Poirot's raised hand. "Let us reconstruct the crime," he continued, pacing slowly. "Sir Reginald was killed between 3:30 and 4:30, struck from behind with a heavy telescope. The window was open, suggesting an escape, yet the tide erased clear footprints. A cigarette stub with lipstick pointed to Monsieur Drake or one of the ladies. A perfume, jasmine and bergamot, was noted by Mademoiselle Thornton. Crushed hydrangeas marked a path, observed by Mademoiselle Marsh. And a shadow seen by Mademoiselle Pritchard placed Madame Cresswell near the cliffs. Lady Cresswell's breath hitched, but Poirot pressed on. The letters in Sir Reginald's desk spoke of financial ruin, betrayal, and a threat. These were not mere clues, but windows into a man's fears. And yet the truth lies not in what was said, but in what was hidden. He turned to Julian Drake, whose fingers froze on his cufflinks. Monsieur Drake, your cigarette stub was a convenient distraction, was it not? You claimed it was taken from your case, yet no one saw this. Your business with Sir Reginald was risky, and his refusal to invest fully threatened your plans. But you are not the killer. Your lies were of greed, not murder. Drake's shoulders sagged, relief mingling with unease. Poirot's gaze shifted to Peter Langley. Monsieur Langley, your alibi crumbled. Mademoiselle Pritchard saw you near the boathouse path at 3:45, and Dr. Marsh's bees were absent, contradicting your story. You stood to inherit Sir Reginald's fortune, and your temper betrayed you. But your anger, it was not enough to kill. Peter's flush deepened, but he remained silent. Poirot turned to Lady Cresswell, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. Madame, the perfume, jasmine and bergamot, was yours. Mademoiselle Thornton recognized it, and Mademoiselle Pritchard saw you near the cliffs. You admitted Sir Reginald was cruel, controlling. You wrote the letter of betrayal, did you not? You were trapped, desperate. But you did not strike the blow. Lady Cresswell's voice broke. I wrote the letter, yes, I was unhappy, but I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded, his eyes softening. I believe you, madame. He turned to Miss Pritchard, whose trembling had returned. Mademoiselle, your confession about the shadow was brave but incomplete. You saw more than you said, oui. Miss Pritchard's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. I didn't want to say, it was too much. Poirot's voice was gentle but relentless. Speak, mademoiselle. The truth, it is near. She swallowed, her voice trembling. I saw, Mrs. Langley. She was near the boathouse just after I saw Lady Cresswell. She was carrying something heavy, wrapped in a cloth. A gasp tore through the room. Mrs. Beatrice Langley's face twisted with fury, her voice icy. This is preposterous. Emily, you're lying to save yourself. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his trap sprung. Madame Langley, you have been silent, but your silence speaks volumes. The telescope, it was taken from the table, wrapped to conceal it, and used to strike Sir Reginald. You knew his habits, his solitude in the boathouse. You resented his control over your son's inheritance, his dismissal of your family's pride. You wore Lady Cresswell's perfume taken from her room to cast suspicion on her. The cigarette stub, you placed it there using lipstick to mislead. The crushed hydrangeas marked your path, and the shadow was yours. Mrs. Langley's face paled, her hands clenching. You have no proof, Poirot. This is conjecture. Poirot's voice was calm, unyielding. The proof, it is in the details. The perfume bottle in your room, half empty, matches the scent in the boathouse. The cloth found in the gardens bears traces of telescope polish. Your gloves, stained with blood, were hidden in the library, found this morning by Inspector Harrow's men. You planned this murder, madame, to free your son from Sir Reginald's shadow, but you could not hide from Hercule Poirot. Mrs. Langley's composure shattered, her voice a low snarl. He deserved it. Reginald treated us like beggars, hoarding his wealth while Peter struggled. I did it for my son. Peter leapt to his feet, his face ashen. Mother, no, you didn't. She turned to him, her eyes fierce. I did, Peter, for you. The room fell silent, the confession echoing like a thunderclap. Inspector Harrow stepped forward, his voice gruff. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Cresswell. As the constables led her away, her head held high despite her trembling hands, the guests sat in stunned silence. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice soft. The heart, mon ami, it drives us to desperate acts, but the truth, it always emerges. The clock struck 5, and the manor seemed to exhale, the weight of the mystery lifted. Poirot's little gray cells had triumphed, and the killer was unmasked. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting Sandy Cove Manor in a twilight glow that softened the harsh edges of the day's revelations. The drawing room, once a stage for suspicion and confrontation, now held a quieter air, as though the manor itself were settling after the storm of truth. Hercule Poirot stood by the French doors, his small frame silhouetted against the fading light, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache immaculate despite the weight of the case. Captain Hastings, seated in an armchair near the fireplace, felt the tension of the past days begin to ebb, though the shock of Mrs. Beatrice Langley's confession lingered like a bitter aftertaste. The guests, no longer suspects but witnesses to a grim resolution, sat in scattered silence. Lady Cresswell, her face pale and drawn, stared at her hands, her earlier defiance replaced by a weary resignation. Peter Langley, his athletic frame slumped, gazed out the window, his eyes red-rimmed with grief and betrayal. Julian Drake, his polished charm restored but subdued, sipped a brandy, his fingers steady but his expression distant. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her notebook now tucked away, sat with a calm that seemed almost unnatural, as though she were analyzing the human drama with scientific detachment. Miss Clara Thornton, her notepad abandoned, leaned against the bookcase, her sharp eyes softened by the weight of the truth. Miss Emily Pritchard, her nervous trembling gone, sat quietly, her face a mask of guilt and relief. Inspector Harrow had departed with Mrs. Langley, who had been taken to the local station under arrest. The evidence, her blood-stained gloves, the cloth with telescope polish, the half-empty bottle of jasmine and bergamot perfume found in her room, had sealed her fate. Yet Poirot, ever the philosopher, seemed less concerned with the mechanics of justice than with the human truths the case had uncovered. Hastings approached his friend, his voice low. You did it, Poirot. You saw through the lies, the red herrings, the distractions, but how did you know it was Mrs. Langley? Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with a quiet satisfaction. Mon ami, it was always in the details. The little gray cells, they do not fail. The perfume, it was too precise a clue, too personal. Madame Cresswell's scent was used to mislead, but only someone with access to her room could have taken it. The cigarette stub with its lipstick was a clumsy attempt to implicate Mademoiselle Thornton or Madame Cresswell. Yet it pointed to a woman's hand. The crushed hydrangeas, the shadow on the cliffs, These were the traces of a careful plan executed by one who knew the estate intimately. He paused, his gaze drifting to the sea beyond the doors. But it was the heart, Hastings, that betrayed her. Madame Langley's love for her son, her fierce desire to protect his future, drove her to a desperate act. Sir Reginald, he was a tyrant in her eyes, withholding the inheritance she believed was Peter's right. She saw murder as the only path to freedom. Hastings nodded, his mind replaying the case. The letters, those threw me off. I thought they pointed to Drake or Lady Cresswell. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. The letters. They were the catalyst, not the solution. The letter of betrayal written by Madame Cresswell revealed her unhappiness, but it was not her hand that struck. The threat, anonymous, was Madame Langley's own work, a warning to Sir Reginald that went unheeded. The financial letter, it implicated Monsieur Drake, but only as a man of greed, not violence. He turned to face Hastings, his voice softening. The human heart, mon ami, it is both the motive and the mirror. Madame Langley believed she acted for love, but love, when twisted by resentment, becomes a poison. It is this that I, Hercule Poirot, must always unravel, not just the crime, but the why of it. The room grew quieter, the guests beginning to disperse to their rooms, their conversations hushed. Lady Cresswell approached Poirot, her voice trembling. Monsieur Poirot, I thank you. I feared you would think it was me. I was unhappy, yes, but I could never... Poirot inclined his head, his tone gentle. Madam, your heart was known to me. Your letter spoke of pain, not murder. Go now and find peace. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and left the room. Peter Langley lingered, his voice hoarse. I didn't know, Poirot. I swear I didn't know she would do this. Poirot's gaze was compassionate but firm. Monsieur, your mother acted to protect you, but the cost was great. You must now live with the truth, and honor it by living well. Peter nodded, his shoulders sagging, and followed his aunt out. The others drifted away, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone in the drawing room. The clock struck 7, its chimes echoing softly in the stillness. Hastings closed his notebook, his mind still racing. It's a grim business, Poirot. She killed for her son, but now he's lost her too. Oui, Poirot replied, his voice soft. The tragedy of crime, it is not only in the act but in its ripples. Madame Langley sought to free her son, but she bound him to grief. Such is the paradox of human folly. He moved to the French doors, stepping onto the terrace where the sea stretched dark and endless before them. The truth, Hastings. It is a light that reveals both beauty and pain. We seek it not for justice alone, but to understand the human soul. This case, it reminds us that love unchecked can destroy as surely as hate. Hastings joined him, the cool night air a balm after the intensity of the day. Will you stay, Poirot? The police may need more from you. Poirot shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. Non, mon ami. My work here is done. The truth is revealed, the killer unmasked. Inspector Harrow, he will handle the rest. I, Hercule Poirot, return to London where other puzzles await. As they stood in silence, the waves whispering below, Hastings felt a profound respect for his friend's genius and his humanity. The case of Sandy Cove Manor had been solved not by luck or coincidence, but by the relentless logic and insight of Poirot's little gray cells. The manor, once a place of secrets, was now a place of truth. and Poirot, as always, slipped quietly away, leaving the world a little clearer in his wake. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The morning after Mrs. Beatrice Langley's confession dawned clear and bright over Sandy Cove Manor, the sun casting a golden sheen across the Devon coast, as though nature itself sought to wash away the stain of the previous day's tragedy. The manor, however, remained cloaked in a subdued melancholy, its grand halls and elegant rooms now echoing with the weight of revealed truths. Hercule Poirot, his suitcase packed and his Panama hat perched precisely on his head, stood on the terrace gazing out at the sea. His small, neat figure was a study in composure, but his bright eyes held a reflective depth, as though he were contemplating not just the case, but the human frailties it had exposed. Captain Hastings, ever his loyal companion, stood beside him, his notebook tucked away, his thoughts heavy with the aftermath of the murder. The guests, no longer bound by suspicion but marked by the ordeal, moved through the manor with a quiet restraint. Lady Cresswell, her face pale but composed, had taken to her room, her grief for her husband tempered by the relief of her own exoneration. Peter Langley, now the heir to Sandy Cove, wandered the gardens alone, his broad shoulders slumped under the burden of his mother's crime. Julian Drake, his business plans in disarray, had retreated to the library, poring over papers as though seeking solace in numbers. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her botanical work resumed, was seen sketching in the rose beds, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous day. Miss Clara Thornton, her novelist's curiosity sated, sat on the terrace with a cup of tea, her sharp eyes softened by reflection. Miss Emily Pritchard, her nervous energy spent, assisted the staff in preparing for the guests' eventual departure, her guilt over betraying Mrs. Langley tempered by a newfound resolve. Inspector Harrow had returned to the manor briefly to tie up loose ends, his gruff manner softened by gratitude for Poirot's insight. "You've done us a service, Mr. Poirot," he said, shaking the detective's hand. Mrs. Langley's confession was airtight, and the evidence, gloves, cloth, perfume, seals the case. We'll take it from here. Poirot inclined his head, his voice measured. "Merci, Inspector, the truth. It is my only pursuit. I trust you will ensure justice is served with care." Harrow nodded and departed, leaving Poirot and Hastings to their final moments at Sandy Cove. The detective turned to his friend, his mustache twitching slightly. "Mon ami, this case, it has been a study in the heart's contradictions. Madame Langley killed for love, yet her love destroyed her son's peace. Such is the tragedy of human passion." Hastings frowned, his mind still grappling with the case's complexities. "It's a bitter end, Poirot. Peter's lost his mother, and Lady Cresswell's lost her husband. Even Drake's plans are in ruins. Was there no way to prevent this?" Poirot's eyes softened, his voice gentle. "No, Hastings. The seeds of this crime were sown long before we arrived. Sir Reginald's tyranny, his control over his wealth and family, it bred resentment. Madame Langley saw no other path, but her choice was her own. We, the detectives, we do not prevent the crime. We illuminate it so that others may learn." They walked toward the manor's entrance, where a car waited to take them to the station. The other guests, aware of Poirot's imminent departure, gathered to offer their farewells. Lady Cresswell emerged from her room, her green eyes weary but grateful. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low. "I was afraid you would think me guilty. Thank you for seeing the truth." Poirot bowed slightly, his manner gracious. Madame, your heart was known to me. Your pain was real, but your hands were clean. Live now and find a new path. Peter Langley approached, his face etched with sorrow. I can't believe she did it, Poirot. For me. How do I live with that? Poirot's gaze was compassionate but firm. Monsieur, you honor your mother by living well, by choosing a path of integrity. The burden is heavy, but it is yours to carry. Miss Thornton, her notepad tucked under her arm, offered a wry smile. You've given me material for a dozen novels, Monsieur Poirot, but I hope never to live through another mystery like this. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Mademoiselle, your pen is sharp, but use it to seek truth, not merely sensation. Dr. Marsh, her sketches in hand, nodded respectfully. Your logic, Monsieur Poirot, is as precise as any scientific method. I've learned much from watching you. Poirot inclined his head. Science and the mind, mademoiselle, they are allies in the pursuit of truth. Miss Pritchard, her nervousness replaced by a quiet strength, spoke last. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner, Monsieur Poirot. I was afraid. Poirot's voice was gentle. Courage, mademoiselle, comes in speaking the truth, no matter the cost. You have done well. As the guests dispersed, Hastings and Poirot climbed into the car, the manor receding behind them as they drove toward the station. The sea sparkled under the morning sun, its beauty undimmed by the tragedy it had witnessed. Hastings, glancing at his friend, felt a familiar awe at Poirot's ability to unravel the human soul as deftly as he unraveled a crime. Poirot, he said, breaking the silence, do you ever tire of it? The lies, the pain, the darkness? Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his voice soft but resolute. The darkness, mon ami, it is part of the human condition. But the truth, it is the light that banishes it. I, Hercule Poirot, am called to bring that light, to restore order where chaos reigns. It is not a burden, but a purpose. The car rolled on, the manor fading into the distance, its secrets laid bare. As they approached the station, Hastings felt a sense of closure, though the echoes of the case would linger. Poirot, as always, had seen what others could not, and in doing so had brought justice to Sandy Cove Manor. The train whistle sounded, signaling their departure, and Hastings knew that wherever they went next, Poirot's little gray cells would be ready for the next puzzle, the next truth, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 13. The Unseen Threads. The train to London clattered rhythmically along the tracks, its steady hum a stark contrast to the turmoil that had engulfed Sandy Cove Manor. Hercule Poirot sat in a plush compartment, his Panama hat resting on the seat beside him, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. His bright eyes, however, were far from idle, flickering with the restless energy of a mind still sifting through the intricacies of the case. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, gazed out the window at the rolling Devon countryside, his thoughts lingering on the dramatic conclusion of Mrs. Beatrice Langley's unmasking. Yet something nagged at him, a sense that the puzzle, though solved, held threads Poirot had not yet fully unraveled. Poirot, Hastings ventured, breaking the silence, you were brilliant as always. Mrs. Langley's confession, the gloves, the perfume, it all fit perfectly, but are you certain there's nothing more? It feels almost too neat, doesn't it? Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. Mon ami, you have the instinct of a true detective, though you lack the method. Oui, the case is solved, the killer unmasked. But the little gray cells, they do not rest. There are threads, small, unseen, that linger, threads that do not alter the guilt but deepen the understanding. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. What threads? Surely Mrs. Langley's motive was clear, protecting Peter's inheritance. Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the passing fields. Oui, her motive was clear, but the heart, it is never so simple. Madame Langley acted for her son, but what drove her to such an extreme? And the others, their secrets, their silences, did they play a role in the shadows of this crime? He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Let us consider, Hastings. The letters in Sir Reginald's desk, 3, each, revealing a facet of his life. The financial warning tied to Monsieur Drake. The letter of betrayal written by Madame Cresswell. The anonymous threat penned by Madame Langley herself. But there is a question. Why did Sir Reginald keep these letters locked away, yet never act upon them? Hastings frowned, his mind racing. Perhaps he didn't take them seriously. Non, Poirot replied, his voice firm. Sir Reginald was a man of control, of calculation. He kept them because they mattered, because they were a map to his fears. The little gray cells, they suggest another hand at work, one that wove these threads together, perhaps unwittingly. Hastings' eyes widened. You mean someone else was involved, an accomplice? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Not an accomplice, mon ami, but a catalyst. Let us return to the boathouse and the mind's eye, the telescope, a heavy, awkward weapon yet chosen with precision, the perfume deliberately used to implicate Madame Cresswell. The cigarette stub, a clumsy red herring. These were the acts of a desperate woman, oui, but desperation born of provocation. He leaned forward, his voice low. Consider Mademoiselle Pritchard. Her confession about seeing Madame Cresswell near the cliffs was true yet incomplete. She saw more. She saw Madame Langley, but she hesitated. Why? Fear, perhaps, but also guilt. The little gray cells suggest she knew more of Sir Reginald's secrets than she admitted. Hastings blinked, startled. Miss Pritchard. But she seemed so timid, so loyal. Précisément, Poirot said. The timid, they see much and say little. Mademoiselle Pritchard was Sir Reginald's secretary, privy to his correspondence, his habits. She knew of the letters, of his fears. She saw the tensions in the household, the cruelty of Sir Reginald toward Madame Cresswell, the resentment of Madame Langley, the ambition of Monsieur Drake. She was the unseen thread connecting them all. Hastings shook his head, struggling to follow. But how does that change the case? Mrs. Langley confessed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. It does not change the guilt, mon ami, but it deepens the story. Mademoiselle Pritchard, in her silence, allowed the tensions to fester. She did not act, but her inaction was a spark. Had she spoken sooner? Had she warned Sir Reginald of the threat or revealed Madame Langley's growing rage? The crime might have been prevented. He sighed, a rare note of melancholy in his voice. The human heart, Hastings, it is a tapestry of choices. Madame Langley chose murder, but others chose silence, fear, or denial. Each thread contributed to the tragedy. The train whistle sounded, signaling their approach to a station. Hastings leaned back, his mind racing. So you're saying Miss Pritchard could have stopped it? That's a heavy burden. Oui, Poirot replied. But such is the nature of truth. It reveals not only the guilty, but the complicity of those who stand by. Mademoiselle Pritchard will carry this knowledge, as will Madame Cresswell, whose letter of betrayal fueled Madame Langley's resolve. Even Monsieur Drake, with his risky venture, played a part in Sir Reginald's fears. Hastings nodded, his respect for Poirot's insight deepening. You see it all, don't you? Not just the crime, but the why of it, the ripples it leaves. Poirot's smile was faint but warm. The little gray cells, they see the surface and the depths. The crime is solved, but the lesson remains. We are all connected, Hastings, by our actions and our silences. To understand this is to understand humanity. The train slowed, the platform coming into view. Poirot gathered his hat and suitcase, his movements precise and deliberate. Come, mon ami, he said, rising. London awaits, and with it new puzzles. But for now we leave Sandy Cove Manor to heal, to weave new threads of its own. As they stepped onto the platform, the sea and the manor far behind, Hastings felt a sense of closure tinged with unease. Poirot had unmasked the killer, but his reflections revealed a deeper truth. That every crime was a web, and every person, guilty or innocent, held a thread. The little gray cells had triumphed, but the human heart, with its endless complexities, remained the greatest mystery of all. Chapter 14. The final threads. The London-bound train rattled through the countryside, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the turbulent events that had unfolded at Sandy Cove Manor. Hercule Poirot sat by the window, his small hands resting on the armrests, his bright eyes fixed on the passing fields, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. His Panama hat lay beside him, and his cream suit remained immaculate, a testament to his fastidious nature even amidst the chaos of a solved murder. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, watched his friend with a mixture of admiration and curiosity, sensing that Poirot's reflections on the case were not yet complete. The confession of Mrs. Beatrice Langley had resolved the crime, but Poirot's earlier words about unseen threads lingered in Hastings' mind, hinting at deeper truths yet to be fully explored. Poirot, Hastings said, breaking the silence. You mentioned Miss Pritchard's role as a catalyst, her silence fanning the flames, but is there more? You seem unsettled, as if there's something left unsaid. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile curving his lips. Mon ami, you grow perceptive. Oui, the case is solved, the killer unmasked, the evidence secure. Madame Langley's confession, it is complete, supported by the gloves, the cloth, the perfume. Yet the little gray cells, they do not rest. There is a final thread, a question of why the tapestry was woven as it was. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. You mean there's more to her motive? Or someone else's involvement? Poirot's gaze sharpened, his voice soft but deliberate. Not involvement in the act, Hastings, but in the prelude. The murder, it was not born in a single moment of rage, but in a slow simmer of resentment fueled by many hands. Madame Langley struck the blow, but the stage was set by others. By Sir Reginald himself, by Madame Cresswell, by Mademoiselle Pritchard, and even by young Monsieur Langley. Hastings frowned, his mind racing to piece together Poirot's meaning. You're saying they all contributed even if they didn't know it? Précisément, Poirot replied, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Let us reconstruct not the crime but the heart of it. Sir Reginald, he was a man of wealth and power, but also of cruelty. His control over his wife, his nephew, his sister-in-law, it bred resentment. Madame Cresswell's letter of betrayal, it revealed her despair, her wish to escape. This letter, it was a spark, igniting Madame Langley's belief that Sir Reginald's death would free her son. He paused, his eyes narrowing. Mademoiselle Pritchard, she knew of this letter, for she handled Sir Reginald's correspondence. Her silence, her fear of speaking out, allowed the tension to grow. And Monsieur Langley, Peter, his own discontent, his arguments with his uncle, they fueled his mother's desperation. Each, in their way, wove a thread into the tapestry of murder. Hastings nodded slowly, beginning to see the pattern. And Drake, his risky venture added pressure, didn't it? Oui, Poirot said. Monsieur Drake's proposal, it threatened Sir Reginald's fortune, which Madame Langley saw as her son's birthright. The letter from Harold Vance, warning of ruin, was another pressure point. All these threads, resentment, fear, ambition, they converged in Madame Langley's heart, leading her to the boathouse with the telescope in hand. The train jolted slightly, and Poirot adjusted his position, his voice growing reflective. But there is one final thread, Hastings, one that ties the case to a deeper truth. Madame Langley, she believed she acted for love, for her son's future. Yet in her act she robbed him of a mother, of peace. This is the tragedy of crime. Not only the loss of life, but the loss of trust, of bonds, of hope. Hastings leaned back, his mind heavy with the weight of Poirot's words. It's grim, Poirot. They all played a part, even if they didn't strike the blow. How do you carry that knowledge, case after case? Poirot's smile was tinged with melancholy. The little gray cells, they seek order, Hastings. They see the chaos of the human heart and strive to make sense of it. I, Hercule Poirot, do not judge the soul, I illuminate it. The truth, it is not always kind, but it is necessary. The train slowed as it approached a small station, the platform bustling with passengers. Poirot gathered his hat, his movements precise and deliberate. Come, mon ami, he said, rising. London is near, and with it, new challenges. But before we leave this case behind, let us consider one final lesson. The unseen threads, they are the most dangerous. A word unspoken, a glance ignored, a secret kept. These can lead to ruin as surely as a weapon. Hastings followed him to the platform, the fresh air a welcome change after the stuffy compartment. The station was alive with the hum of travelers, but Hastings' thoughts remained with Sandycove Manor. Do you think they'll recover, Poirot? Peter, Lady Cresswell, the others? Poirot's gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon. Recovery, it is a choice, Hastings. Madame Cresswell, she may find freedom in her widowhood, though it comes at a cost. Monsieur Langley, he must learn to live with his mother's sacrifice. The others, Dr. Marsh, Mademoiselle Thornton, Mademoiselle Pritchard, they will carry their own burdens, but they are strong. The human spirit, it bends, but it does not always break. As they boarded the connecting train to London, Hastings felt a sense of resolution, though tinged with the somber understanding Poirot had imparted. The case of Sandycove Manor was closed, the killer brought to justice. But the unseen threads, the silences, the resentments, the unspoken truths, would linger in the lives of those left behind. Poirot's genius had not only solved the crime, but illuminated the fragile connections that bound the guilty and innocent alike. The train pulled away, carrying them toward the city where new mysteries awaited. Poirot settled into his seat, his eyes closing briefly. a rare moment of rest for the little gray cells. Hastings, watching his friend, knew that wherever they went, Poirot would continue to unravel the unseen threads, bringing light to the darkest corners of the human heart. Chapter 15. The Departure. The London skyline loomed into view as the train neared its final destination, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the bustling city. Hercule Poirot sat by the window, his Panama hat now resting on his knee, his small hands folded neatly, his bright eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction tinged with the melancholy of a case concluded. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, felt the weight of Sandy Cove Manor's tragedy begin to lift, replaced by the familiar rhythm of city life. Yet the echoes of Mrs. Beatrice Langley's confession, the unseen threads of complicity, and Poirot's profound reflections lingered in his mind, a reminder of the complexity of human motives. The train slowed, its whistle piercing the air as it approached Paddington Station. Poirot stirred, his mustache twitching slightly as he gathered his thoughts. "Mon ami," he said, his voice soft but clear. "The case of Sandy Cove Manor, it is closed, yet it leaves its mark. The truth, it is a double-edged sword. It frees, but it also wounds." Hastings nodded, his notebook long since tucked away, his mind still grappling with the case's deeper implications. "It's hard to shake, Poirot. Mrs. Langley's act was monstrous, yet she did it for love. And the others, Miss Pritchard, Lady Cresswell, even Peter, they all played a part, even if they didn't know it." Poirot's eyes gleamed, a faint smile curving his lips. "Précisément, Hastings. The human heart, it is a labyrinth. Love, resentment, fear, these are the threads that weave both crime and redemption. Madame Langley chose a path of destruction, but the others, they chose silence, and in that silence, the seeds of tragedy were sown." He paused, his gaze drifting to the platform where passengers milled about, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in Devon. The little gray cells, they see not only the crime but the why of it. This case, it reminds us that every choice, every word unspoken shapes the tapestry of fate. Hastings leaned back, his thoughts turning to the guests left behind at Sandy Cove. "Do you think they'll find peace, Poirot? Peter especially, he's lost so much." Poirot's expression softened, his voice gentle. "Peace, mon ami, is a journey, not a destination. Young Monsieur Langley, he carries a heavy burden, but he is young, resilient. Madame Cresswell, she may find freedom in her loss, though it will be tinged with sorrow. Mademoiselle Pritchard, her courage in speaking the truth will guide her forward. The others, Dr. Marsh, Mademoiselle Thornton, Monsieur Drake, they will move on, each marked by this tragedy in their own way." The train came to a stop, the platform bustling with activity. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with characteristic precision. "Come, Hastings," he said, his tone brisk. "London awaits, and with it new puzzles. The world, it does not pause for reflection, and neither must we." They stepped onto the platform, the noise and energy of the city enveloping them. Hastings carried Poirot's suitcase, his mind still turning over the case. "You know, Poirot," he said as they navigated the crowd, "I thought the perfume was the key at first, the jasmine and bergamot. It seemed so personal, so deliberate." Poirot's mustache twitched, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "The perfume, it was a clever ruse, Hastings, but it was the heart behind it that mattered. Madame Langley used it to point to Madame Cresswell, but in doing so she revealed her own desperation." The little gray cells, they saw through the deception to the truth. They hailed a taxi, the driver tipping his cap as they climbed in. As the cab wove through London streets, Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed, a rare moment of repose. "The case of Sandy Cove Manor," he murmured. "It was a study in contrasts, order and chaos, love and hate, truth and lies. We, the detectives, we bring order, but we cannot erase the chaos of the heart." Hastings smiled, accustomed to Poirot's philosophical musings. "You brought order, all right. Inspector Harrow was practically bowing to you by the—" And Poirot's smile was modest but pleased. "The inspector, he is a man of action, but he recognizes method when he sees it. The evidence, the gloves, the cloth, the perfume. It was sufficient, but it was the psychology, the understanding of motive that sealed the truth." The taxi pulled up outside Poirot's London flat, its familiar facade a welcome sight after the turmoil of Sandy Cove. As they stepped out, the city's hum surrounded them, a reminder of the world beyond the manor's isolated drama. Poirot paid the driver, his movements precise, and turned to Hastings. "Mon ami," he said, his voice warm, "you have been, as always, a steadfast companion. Your questions, your instincts, they sharpen the little gray cells. Now we rest, but not for long. The world, it is full of mysteries, and Hercule Poirot will not be idle." Hastings grinned, clapping his friend on the shoulder. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Poirot. But maybe a cup of tea before the next case?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Tea, oui, but only if it is prepared with precision. Come, we shall see what my housekeeper has in store." As they entered the flat, the door closing behind them, Hastings felt a sense of completion. The case of Sandy Cove Manor had been a dark journey, but Poirot's genius had brought light to its shadows. The unseen threads, the silences, the resentments, the choices had been laid bare, and justice had prevailed. Yet, as always, Poirot's final reflection lingered. The human heart, with all its flaws, was the greatest mystery of all, and one that even the little gray cells could only illuminate, never fully solve.